Welcome to Friday night's video in our second master series. I do believe this is the 72nd video in our second master series, the 21st video in our basic processors, and the 8th video in our convolution and reverb. So I hope that that last video made sense to where basically that you are trying to do a couple different things. You're trying to sculpt your responses to have a good spectral content, just like a nice sound sculpted room, so they sound as good as possible, and also trying to sculpt them so that they mimic the equalization work and work you've done on whatever you're using them, especially on stuff that's like an out front vocal or supporting track, stuff like that. That is very advanced work. That you being that next level master audio engineer is something that as you start to understand it, you start to apply it and experiment with it, because it's an experimental thing, but it is very valid. The next thing we wanted to talk about was a couple different things. First thing is automation, and then the second thing is, things like, different types of unique applications. So the concept here is pretty simple. The first concept when we talk about automation with reverberation, there are all kinds of situations you might use, things like, automation on your track when you're doing something and then, render it down, is that, for the most part, most of the time, it's going to be something like your wet dry. Like, you might want to add more or less for certain environments. But this comes down to that every moment in time is important. So an example of this, you really need to sit down and think about where all this can be applicable, because it's really debatable and an opinionated concept. But a good example, I've got this vocalist that's going along here, and I've got the actual automation on this one here. But let's say I'm doing this vocalist. During the part where the vocalist is going, and then I want to go down to the river, during that part, I might not want so much reverb on there. I might not want so much on there. Or I might not want so much bodybuilding on there because of it multiplying the sound, and that thickening it up or enriching it might be a little bit too much, depending on how of detailed, work I'm doing and how out front the track is. But more times than not, it's boiling down to the automation work's going to become really handy when you're dealing with the spatialization reverberation. Because during that part that the vocalist is going, and then I just want to be happy and go, that part you might not use as much reverberation so that you don't get overlapping things happening, because it starts to cause mud, right? So you might want to back off in that area a little bit. But when he gets part and then he goes, then I just want to go high. During that part, you can kick that reverb up a little bit. It fattens it up, thickens it up, makes it sound big, like it's in a big space while he's holding that note. And yeah, it just, whoa, yeah. And then back off again when he starts, rambling along. But to do it, I'm going. When he's getting a lot of, I call it like staccato singing. When the words are going along, it's like staccato playing. It's like this word starts, this one stops, and if they start overlapping too much from reverberation, then it can start sounding muddy. And also, at the end of something, you might have at the end of it, it's like, and then I want to go high. And it cuts off, and you want to really boost the reverb up right at the end of it, to where it's like, you had he was singing along, you had it down, then you kicked a little bit when he was holding the note, then you kicked it way up when he, at the very end, when he hit the last end of the note and cut his voice off, so it kind of reverberated off out into the background, like all of a sudden it's just like whoosh, washed out there, like that tail effect that just strung out across, across time, those are very valid arguments for automation working with your reverberation and convolution. So that simple concept are some of the most, those are just some basic examples, but there can be all kinds of, if you sit down and think about it, what it's going to do, what reverberation actually does, and in those type of situations, how you might apply reverb And you're taking every moment in time into consideration so that every moment in time is important and taking into consideration. And this tool has helped every moment in time be as good as it can be and also to get done what you want to happen, and it's like, there can be lots of other examples. You might have another example is you might have like a pad synth going along, and he's going pop 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 pop. He's doing something that's got this really weird thing, and it's just got it's way too static and way too clean, and you really want it to wash over each other. So each one of those staccato like notes are blending over each other more. So during that one part in this one chorus section or something, you might boost up the wet and dry mix on it up quite a bit so that those notes start to kind of blend into each other, that the tails go off and start to ride over the top of the other tails. Maybe not a lot, but just some. So, there's a big difference between sometimes I'll do a production that's hyper clean and one that I want not so clean, or in a situation, or it's background that I want it to blend more together, or it's out front, but it's way too clean and pop, 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 and I want it to smooth it out with the reverb and have those notes overflowing. It's almost like taking my MIDI notes and dragging them over so that their cutoff point is longer, is over where the next starting one is. Like this note's supposed to go to here, and then this note goes here. I take that first note and I drag it out farther, so it's actually overlapping the start of the next note. So it's not so staccato. Does that make sense? But that's polyphonic, so you have to make sure you get your settings right if you're working with MIDI. But that's an example. So you can go on and on and on and on. The better you understand what it's doing and how it affects a note, that you understand it's going to extend it to some point. Does that make sense? And there's sometimes you want to cut way back in some situations. Some situations you want to go a little bit longer, and some situations you want to go real long, like at a tail end or something. Or for some certain area, you just want it to go washy, and it's like you want it to be hyper clean, but with spatialization just a little bit. And then for this, ba ba ba, you want it to be real ba ba ba, and it's just kind of washing all over each other just for that 1 second. So use automation. I can go on and on with this, but it's something you need to take into consideration and start thinking about it so that you take every moment in time into consideration. So when we're talking about going around flagging stuff, then you're listening to the production, the guy going on da 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 bup bup. What you might want to do there. Does that make sense with your convolution to try to enhance what's going on there? One of the biggest things here is be real careful with things that are back farther in the mix, that you're going to find out that you want to mess with that stuff less and less and less as it goes farther back in the mix because of clarity issues. As it goes back farther in the mix, you don't fuss with it so much because you really start to cause clarity issues. Unless you really want to sound grungy and dirty and messy, that it will start causing you a mess. So you really want to back off and really focus on things that are sitting on top of the mix, out front vocals, lead parts, supportive tracks like, backing vocals and things like that. As it goes farther back in the mix, or you got a drum part for one break, and you want to do something and it's like, or what's going on there. Your automation is a huge tool, and using it in more and less degrees at certain areas is a huge thing to help make your production that much better. So look into it. A lot of the other parameters you get into as you become a really good audio engineer and you master your convolution reverb, you can do that with a lot of other parameters that might be on your convolution reverb to affect things or cause effects, or all kinds of different things that these parameters might allow you to do. But that's going to take experimentation on your part, how it affects pieces of audio with different types of impulses, and then how could you artistically make that something with your automation changing to affect something differently. So that's just something that you have to think about, take into consideration, and begin experimenting on. So the other part of that, we talked about like unique applications. That can be another thing. Sometimes, this is an artistic thing. So, just because my opinion on this one part that this vocalist or this piano or this synth is doing something that, being trying to be a master audio engineer evaluating it, my first initial response is not to try to do something weird and wild with it unless I'm the creator on the project. Does that make sense? I mean, I'm the composer and, the producer, that I have that liberty. Does that make sense? And if you do have that liberty, then this is a great tool because you can do weird stuff with it. You can actually cause it. You can unique applications like, let's say that you've got a sax note that just goes whap. It's a sax note. You've made the file, you've recorded it off your synthesizer, you've sound sculpted it perfectly. You can take it and drag it into your convolution reverb. So that if I have something like this, and I have, if I go over to here and I go into my browser section and I have like some transfer files. Now these are the samples, test files, and things like that. But even this one note vocal like I have here, I can take this is this note that's right here, and I can actually drag this into my convolution reverb. Now, this is going to, depending on how I sound sculpted it, this is going to have an effect on the audio, have no doubt. There is no doubt that this application of me dragging this note of this individual going, you might want to shorten it up. You know what I mean? No matter what it is you're using, you might want to shorten it up some before you drag it in there to, like maybe 10, 20 milliseconds or something like that. You can go up to like 50 milliseconds, but, you want to keep them cut down and make sure they've, put a fade on the end of them and stuff like that. Otherwise, you might have some problems. Bounce it and render it like that. Make sure you got no clicks and nothing going on at the beginning of it and stuff like that. But any kind of sound that you have, you can make a file of it and you can drag it in your convolution reverb for really wild, unique applications. The deal here is the convolution reverb doesn't really see it as its a synthesizer. So it interprets it as something else. So it takes the sound impulse, and it takes, which would be basically, it's interpreting the sound as different impulse responses, just like if you look at an impulse response, and it's evaluating any frequency content, just like frequency, spectral content, and impulse response, and it's going to try to convolve that onto whatever sound you're working on. So you can come up with some really wild, unique applications of trying to use your impulse response in that way, which I have done that. I took a pad synth one time and got this really weird pad synth, and it was like wop 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 wop, and it was like just really wild. And I cut it into an impulse response kind of size, about 30 milliseconds, and it was like well, actually it was a little bit longer because it went like wop wop wop, and I drug it into my convolution reverb and used it on this chorus section on this vocals, and it came out sounding just wild, dude. Like there was nearly no other way to accomplish that. You know what I mean? There just wasn't. It was a very unique application. So anything that you have that's an audio file, you can drag into your convolution reverb. You just can. Just be careful. The longer it is, that it's going to try to convolve that onto each sound. So, how convolution reverb works is you can sometimes end up with a mess, but you can come out with some very unique sounding applications that are really, if you're going to use it on this sitar or this electric guitar or this vocalist or this to do something weird with this synthesizer, your sound sculpting, you're going to have this weird, sound to it. There's some really wild techniques you can do that with, and different applications of it, trying to, cause using your convolution reverb in ways that we don't talk about most of the time because it's not a way that you're normally using it. So trying to look at each one of these parameters as something that can cause a unique, different thing to happen that's not normal, that you would think is doing a good job of, adding convolution reverb to a file. Look at it in the reverse way, not reverse, but basically reverse way. How can I make it do something different, wild, and unique? So I certainly hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.